Well, I'm here, and I hope this is going to work. It seems like it's been so long since I've been in front of the saddle. I'm not sure if I've got everything set up right. So I guess I'll find out in just a couple minutes if Adam calls me or Annie and says that, hey, Dad, you're off center, out of focus, and just ugly to boot. So we'll see. Anyway, welcome tonight, and thank you for being here. If you're out there, please let me know. And again, as always, I would welcome not only your comments, but I welcome those comments about where you're watching from and how many of you there are. And, we've been at this now more than 2 years. And if you figure it all up, that is well in excess of 200 firesides now. So we've been at this for a while. Now, first of all, let me explain. I told you last week that Adam and I were going to be in Israel. Well, clearly, we're not in Israel. And I'll tell you why as we get a little deeper into it. What you're looking at is COVID-19. I have COVID. Don't worry. I don't think you're going to catch it through the camera. I'll tell you the story in just a couple minutes. As we get deeper into it, I'll explain what happened. So I tested positive for COVID on Wednesday, and we were supposed to fly out on Friday. And of course, there was no way that's going to happen. So here we are. Let me remind you, my dear friends, that the next Knowing Joseph seminar is Saturday, March 26th at This Is the Place Heritage Park in Salt Lake City. The tickets for that event are available at historyofthesaints.org. Now, why should you go to this event? Well, consider who the speakers are. Susan Easton Black. That lady is still so much fun to listen to. So much good grist in what she says. Very entertaining, and she hasn't lost it a bit. I love listening to Susan. Anthony Sweat. Anthony just came out with a new book, part of which he talked about staying on the covenant path. And Anthony will be, in some manner of speaking, will be addressing a subject similar to that. Anthony and Gaynell Lynn Condy and Heidi Tucker, these three souls are three of the most popular younger speakers in the church. And everywhere they go, they draw in huge crowds. Now, the theme of this conference is finding hope in the restoration. I've been doing a lot of thinking about that. My friends, this is that time of the year when people just barely are starting to come out of the midwinter blues. If you would like a pick-me-up, if you would like encouragement and strength and good doctrine and the Spirit of the Lord, then Saturday, March 26th, at This Is the Place Heritage Park in the Garden Center. I think you'll enjoy it. Tickets are available at historyofthesaints.org. And as always, Tempering Steele is still available. I'm going to be quoting a passage out of this book a little bit later on in the fireside. It's still available at historyofthesaints.org and at glenrawsonstories.com. If you haven't picked up a copy of this fictional novel of faith and adventure, I recommend it to you. Thank you so much, all of you that have read it and sent in those glowing reviews. That's very gratifying. And it looks like, yes, I will be writing a sequel. So as I begin tonight, I ask for your faith and your prayers. Out of the weakness of my words, by your faith, maybe something good and strong will come. When sore trials come upon you, did you think to pray? When your soul was filled with sorrow, balm of Gilead did you borrow at the gates of day. Oh, how praying rests the weary. Prayer will change the night to day. So when life gets dark and dreary, don't forget to pray. It is thought by some that no one can write creatively without inserting themselves into the text that they write. This hymn was written by Mary Ann Kidder in 1875. Could these powerful words from the hymn, "Did You Think to Pray," have come from a life of personal experience for Mary Ann? Mary Ann Pepper was born March 16, 1820 in Boston, Massachusetts, the daughter of a master mariner. It is said when Mary Ann was 16 years old, she suddenly went blind, totally blind. It was thought that she would never recover her sight, but miraculously, 1 year later, her sight returned. Again, it was considered a miracle. In 1844, she married Ellis Usher Kidder, and together they had 3 children. With the outbreak of the Civil War, Ellis enlisted in the Union Army. 6 days after the Battle of Antietam, Ellis passed away, leaving Mary Ann filled with sorrow and 3 small children to raise on her own and support. Well, Mary Ann took to writing in earnest, no longer as a hobby, as a means of supporting herself. It would not be the end of her sore trials. On August the 3rd, 1865, her youngest son, Walter, drowned. Life would again become dark and dreary for Mary Ann as her beloved daughter, May, passed away April 11th, 1883. When Mary Ann wrote of pleading for grace that you might forgive another who had crossed you on your way, was that again wisdom, personal, gained from a life well lived? Perhaps Mary Ann's daughter-in-law, Augustus, said of her, "She was not hedged about," this is speaking of Mary Ann, "she was not hedged about by doctrinal or a dogmatic belief. She was a Deedest, not a Creedest, believing fully in the humanitarian idea of tolerance." End of quote. There is evidence to support the idea that Mary Ann was something of a nonconformist to the prevailing churches, creeds, if you will, of the day. When she wrote of pleading for loving favor as a shield today, surely she was the master of the art. Augusta, her daughter-in-law, again wrote of her, quote, "Nothing ever marred her serenity, and everybody found in her a sympathetic listener. Her will was of iron, but she never allowed her ideas to interfere with another's. She respected everyone's opinion." End of quote. If a hymn ever bespoke the character of its author, "Did You Think to Pray" is surely one of those. Mary Ann Pepper Kidder passed away November the 24th, 1905 in Chelsea, Massachusetts. Next story. I listed this on Instagram. I just happened to come across this today, and I thought perhaps just in a moment I would share this with you. 190 years ago this week, a significant event occurred in church history that's instructive to us all. A man by the name of Symonds Ryder had joined the church there near Hiram, Ohio. And then he was extended a call by the Almighty. In writing that call to him, Sidney Rigdon happened to misspell Symonds Ryder's name, spelling it R-I-D-E-R instead of R-Y-D-E-R. Well, according to the history, Ryder became offended at the misspelling of his word, reasoning that if God could make a mistake in misspelling his name, then God could make a mistake in calling him to serve in the ministry. Well, that and other things combined, Symonds Ryder apostatized. Well, in his apostasy, it turned to anger and to bitterness. Symonds Ryder was among those who organized into a mob on the week of March 24th, 1832, and attacked the prophet Joseph Smith, and he was tarred and feathered. Not only was Joseph terribly brutalized in that attack, but so too was his young son, Joseph Murdoch, left exposed to the bitter elements of March 1832, Hiram, Ohio, and died as a result of that, becoming, some have said, the first martyr of this dispensation. And all of that from a man who got offended, not the least of which because his name was misspelled. Now, there's a lesson there for all of us. If you're ever offended, especially at church leadership or at church practice or church doctrine or church history, tread lightly, walk softly, do not act rashly. How many foolish, irrevocable, unforgivable deeds have been carried out in the heat of the moment in anger because someone's offended? And incidentally, I wonder about this. Symonds Ryder's gravestone in Hiram, Ohio. Take a look at it. It's on Instagram. It's misspelled, both in his first name and in his church affiliation. Just a thought for you. That was 190 years ago this coming week. All right, now the story that I promised to share with you. This is where it all began, earlier this week. It was cold and it was frosty, definitely a winter morning. I got out of bed around 6 o'clock in the morning, as is my habit, and went downstairs to build a fire in my wood-burning stove. I love my wood-burning stove. There's nothing like curling up next to a good warm fire first thing in the morning. Well, opened up the firebox and reached into the wood box to get a small piece of kindling-sized wood. I grabbed it, and as I did, I felt the stick bite me. My first thought was that I'd hit a nail or a thorn or something like that. But the sting quickly made me realize something had bit me. Whatever it was, I rolled it in my fingers and felt whatever the creature was wiggling and squirming. And without even looking at it, whatever it was, I flicked it into the fire. I never saw what it was. It stung. It really stung. But unlike a wasp or a bee or a hornet, there was no evidence of a bite or a sting whatsoever. Just the pain. Well, my dad used to say, it's a long ways from your heart, so I just forgot about it and went on my way. Well, that afternoon, all of a sudden, I got really, really sick. Chills, fever, aches, headaches, cramping, difficulty breathing, convulsions. I launched into convulsions so bad I couldn't even walk. My wife was ready to take me to the ER. And the finger that had got stung that morning, it suddenly began to itch and to swell. The finger swelled up huge. And then the next thing, my hand started to swell up and it started moving up my arm. Something was definitely not right. And all of a sudden, I was really, really sick. And that night, I couldn't sleep. People say that, they have a restless... No, I couldn't sleep all night long. I could not sleep. The next morning, a thought occurred to me. What if that was a spider bite? I don't even know where that thought came from. So I looked it up and discovered that I had all the textbook symptoms except one of the bite of a black widow spider. It all fit. Well, my friend Judy is a nurse and a dear friend. She urged me to get it checked out, explaining what could happen if I didn't get this thing under control. So my wife took me up to the clinic and we obtained the necessary drugs of caution. And I didn't go for anti-venom, that wasn't necessary, just something to make sure that I didn't get infection. One little spider, one itsy bitsy ugly little 8-legged beast. And I was in abject misery and lost 3 days of work. Now, here's the first part of the story. I was reminded again of a simple truth. Out of small and simple things, great things are brought to pass. Now think about that. We always interpret great as a reference to quality, but great is also a reference to quantity, as in the great and dreadful day of the Lord. Not only do small and simple choices like praying, studying, serving, and attending the temple result in great and good things with the Lord, but small and stupid choices can result in great and terrible things on the other side as well. Lesson learned. Lesson learned. Be careful. Small and simple, stupid choices can lead to great consequences as well. Like putting your hand where it shouldn't be without a glove on. Here's the rest of the story. And that is, just as I'm coming off the end of the spider bite and it's starting to taper off, the symptoms of something else begin to manifest themselves. They're almost exactly the same as the spider bite. I couldn't breathe. Congestion, pain, body aches, all the same symptoms. The spider swelling starts going down and the other stuff starts ramping up. So I go to the clinic and I get tested in preparation to leave for Israel, not thinking anything of it. I got to go to Israel. I have to have a COVID test. I test positive. Oh, there was no hesitation. I had COVID-19. And there went my trip to Israel. 2 days before I'm supposed to leave, I come down with COVID. Now, it's almost laughable. 2 years I have endured this pandemic. All my family has gotten it. Everyone's been sick around me. I've been exposed so many times. And I don't get even one inkling of the flu until 2 days before COVID-19 is supposed to be over and I'm going out to tour the world once again. And I get knocked down by COVID. I hope this isn't irreverent, but I'm sure the Lord has a sense of humor. That's why it happened. But anyway, as it stands right now, I'm coming out the other end of the effects. It's been mild. I can't complain. And hopefully by this next Sunday, Adam and I will be on our way to join our group who are right now in Egypt without us, cruising the Nile. Oh well. All right, next story. Robert Taylor Burton was first among the rescue teams to leave Salt Lake City in October 1856 in search of the handcart people stranded on the plains. He not only was there, but he was appointed an assistant to Captain George D. Grant, who led the expedition of rescuers. Burton gives detailed accounts day by day of the heroic efforts of the rescuers to save those people. He tells of snow so deep that the axle trees of the wagons would drag, of temperatures so bitterly cold at Devil's Gate that the companies could not move forward. He describes that they found suffering from cold and hunger, much of which it was impossible for them to relieve. In the snow and intense cold, Burton said, we were reduced to 1/4 rations, very many of the people falling by the wayside in spite of all our efforts, burying as many as 16 persons, he said, in one grave. End of quote. His diary and journals are invaluable reading. Robert Burton stayed with the people all the way from Wyoming and into the valley, and was among the last ones to come in. He summarized the immigrant's journey thus, quote, "The hardships and sufferings of this company of people can never be told." End of quote. And that comes from a man of vast experience. And again, speaking of their journey after the companies had been found, Brother Burton said, quote, "I have striven for years to obliterate from my mind some of the sights that I witnessed on the return to the valley." End of quote. This is after they'd been rescued. This was after they were on their way back to the valley. The terrible things he saw. Captain Robert Taylor Burton kept detailed records of all that was donated by the saints and distributed to the handcart immigrants. He would go on from there, from this rescue effort, to serve as a missionary in Europe, to serve as Major General of the Utah Militia, to serve as a member of the Utah legislature, a regent of the University of Deseret, and a counselor for 30 years to Bishop Edward Hunter, the presiding bishop of the church. His was a noble and giving heart. The story is told that as the Martin Company passed through Echo Canyon just outside of Salt Lake City, on their way into the valley, virtually on the last leg of the journey after all of the horrible things that they have endured, now in Echo Canyon, Sarah Minnie Caitlin Squires went into labor and delivered a baby girl on the morning of November 26th, 1856. The little one was named Echo in honor of her place of birth. It is reported that there was not adequate clothing to keep the little one warm. John Jakes recorded the following in his diary, quote, "One of the relief party generously contributed part of his clothing to clothe the little stranger." End of quote. Literally, in that extreme cold, the rescuer, quote, "took off his own homespun shirt and gave it to the mother to wrap the baby." End of quote. That generous, compassionate rescuer was General Robert T. Burton. On his deathbed in 1907, as his family was gathered around, Bishop Burton urged them with all of his soul, quote, "Be kind to the poor." And so he was. My dear friends, I love that story. And I can't help but think, if you and I would minister to the poor and needy in our wards like that, oh, what a Zion church this would be. Okay, I said that I would do this. I hope you don't mind, but I feel very strongly about this book. And the reason that I feel so strongly about this book is because if there's anyone out there who's having a crisis of faith, questions about doctrine, questions about history, questions about the existence of God, I was there. I went through it. And this book is about that. And even though it's a fictional novel, the questions are true. And I want to read to you a portion of that, if you don't mind. This takes place on the very summit of the Grand Teton. "Look," Shawnee said pulling him out of his thoughts. Looking where she pointed, J.O. watched as the massive clouds to the east rolled back and opened like God parting the sea, exposing a breathtaking view of Jackson Hole, Wyoming, some 6,000 feet below. "Oh, wow," J.O. said breathlessly. Now both of her hands clutched his upper arm in a tight grip. "Look at that, J.O. Look at it. It's incredible. Have you ever seen anything like it?" J.O. shook his head, unable to speak. There was simply nothing he could say that would do justice to what he saw and what he felt. How often does one get to see the world like this? Shawnee turned and stood face to face with him, the intensity in her eyes surprising him. "J.O., I don't know anything about you or what you believe or even why I'm saying this, but I want you to know with all of my soul, there is a God. And this," her hand swept over the panorama, "is only the beginning of his gifts." She stopped speaking, but her eyes, shining in blue, held his. J.O. couldn't look away. Something in those eyes captured and held him. Her words cut to his soul like a knife. Slowly, almost unconsciously, he nodded in agreement. She was right. There was no explaining it, but he knew unequivocally she was telling the truth. There was a God. It was as though he had always known, and that there had never been so many years of doubt. He looked away toward the clouds. The gap in them closed as quickly as it had formed, shutting off all view of anything beyond more than 100 feet. Together, they stood, reveling in the moment. Then something jolted J.O. An innate sense of alarm sounded, and he once again became acutely aware of his surroundings. The hair on the back of his neck began to stand up, and a peculiar fuzziness charged the air. He paused for a moment, sensing, listening, then caught it. The hum and crackle of static electricity. Adrenaline slammed into him like a sledgehammer. "Get off!" he shouted at the others as he jumped off the summit rock. "Get off now!" They all looked at him in confusion. He jumped off the rock and reached behind for Shawnee. Seeing the bewildered expression, he thrust his arm to the sky and shouted, "Lightning!" I know it's a fictional novel, my friends, but the questions are real. And if any of you have someone you love who has some of those kinds of questions, maybe this book will be of use to them. For this next story, I'm indebted to my friend, Jean Tonioli. It comes from her family history. Pernilla Nilsdotter Bohm Nielsen was a faithful Swedish church member who at the age of 45 immigrated to Utah in 1863 with the John F. Saunders Company, along with her 3 youngest children, one of whom died on the Pioneer Trail. Because of limited funds, Pernilla, her husband, and teenage son made the journey 2 years later. The family settled in Fairview, Sanpete County, Utah. Though their material possessions were meager, they were happy to be among the church members in Utah and enjoy the blessings of the gospel. Pernilla helped in the home and did work for other people to help support herself and her family. She was faithful, helped others with her skills of sewing, cooking, candle making, spinning wool, and weaving cloth. She often bore her testimony of the truths of the restored gospel. Can you picture her? A faithful Swedish immigrant, faithful saint, learning the language and learning the culture of Zion. Pernilla had known much sorrow because of the death of close family members who were dear to her. She was the oldest and only surviving child of Karna Jonsdotter and Nils Bohm. 9 of her brothers and sisters died in infancy, and the family coped with their seemingly endless grief by memorizing large sections of the Bible. Her dear parents died within days of each other in 1855. During her marriage to Ole, they had 9 children. Only 4 grew to adulthood. She buried 2 infants, a 2-year-old boy, 2 4-year-old girls, and a 7-year-old boy. Her son, Per, drowned at the age of 20 on the Green River during a mission to rescue immigrants coming to Utah. Finally, her dear husband, Ole, died after a long illness at the age of 55. Thoughts of beloved family members in the spirit world were constantly a part of her life. Late in Pernilla's life, she was at her home in Fairview, Utah. Her sons, 2 sons, Lars and Sven, were grown adults and living on their own. Her youngest son, Ole Jr., now a young man, was watching over his mother and taking care of her home and property. One evening he was out cutting wood and saw a group of people enter his mother's home. Well, he finished, gathered up the wood, and went to the house to see who those guests were. To his surprise, when he entered, there was no one there, no one but his mother. He asked her if she'd had visitors. Quote, she said, "There were some people here from our departed family who asked me to do their temple work." End of quote. So many ties to loved ones in the spirit world. It is not surprising that they would reach out to her for her help. And she did. Pernilla did the work for many of her relatives in the Manti Temple before she passed away on 20 December 1898 in Fairview, Utah. My friends, I see it again and again. We live in the presence of the dead. They know us, they love us, and this work, the work of redeeming the dead and sealing our families together, of gathering Israel, is the most important work on earth. Last story. Brigham Frederick Grant. I suspect that very few of you have heard of him. Affectionately, he was known as B.F. Grant. Was born October 17th, 1856 in Salt Lake City. When he was just 6 weeks old, his father, Jedediah M. Grant of the First Presidency, passed away in Salt Lake, having worn out his life in the Lord's service as part of the Great Reformation. And then, when B.F. was only 2 years old, his mother married out of the church and left him. The child, B.F., was sent to live with a family in Richmond, Utah. During his time in Richmond, Bishop Mariner Wood Merrill came to know the boy and love him as one of his own. In fact, he said he wanted to take him in as one of his own sons. But evidently, B.F., who was never taught to read and write by his foster family, became very unhappy with the situation where he lived and made plans to run away. He arranged with a wagon boss passing through the area to catch a freight company going to the mining camps of Montana. And when the day came, the boy carried it out and disappeared, leaving behind family, friends, and the faith of his fathers. It is reported that he became, quote, a very profane man, and that he hadn't the slightest interest in the gospel, end of quote. All of this deeply troubled his older brother, Heber J. Grant. Elder Grant shared those concerns with his friend and colleague in the 12, Mariner Wood Merrill. According to President Grant, Elder Merrill would always smile and say, quote, "Well, Brother Grant, don't you worry about that brother of yours. He'll come back. He'll come back all right. Mark my words. End of quote. Then Elder Merrill told Elder Grant how the night after BF had run away from Richmond, he began to feel, this is Elder Merrill, that he began to feel almost rebellious. He had told his wife about how the boy had lost his father at such a young age, and his mother had now married out of the church and abandoned him. Quote, now this boy will be without father and mother and will undoubtedly go to the bad. I feel as if the Lord ought to have inspired me to take this boy away. I learned to love him, Elder Merrill said, almost like one of my own children. End of quote. That very night that Elder Merrill experienced the following dream. He shared that dream with Elder Grant. Now let me renew. On the night that BF ran away, Elder Merrill was frustrated, almost angry with the Lord. Why didn't the Lord warn me? And that night, as he went to bed, he experienced the following dream, and now he's sharing that dream with BF's older brother, Heber J. Grant. Quote, I saw your brother traveling from one place to another with the vilest kind of company. But wherever he was always surrounded by a light. In my dream, I asked, what does that light mean? A voice answered, that light is the influence of a faithful father to protect the boy from committing sin whereby he cannot come back into the fold. And then Elder Merrill continues, then I saw him come back to Utah. I saw him join the church and become a hard and diligent worker, traveling throughout the stakes of Zion, laboring among the wayward, careless, and indifferent and profane young men all over the church, and meeting with marvelous success. That is why I have told you time and time again during the years that your brother took no interest in the church and was a very profane man, that he would eventually come back and labor among the youth of Zion. End of quote. B.F. Grant did come back. The dream was fulfilled in every particular. He became particularly active in working with the young men of the church and was part of the committee that sponsored the first scouting activities in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It is said of him that in one single winter, B.F. Grant got over 500 boys active in the Mutual Improvement Associations in Salt Lake County. He passed away in 1936, firm in the faith and full of years. He went on to become a successful businessman, civic leader, family man, and servant of the Lord. We have no idea the influence of our faithful fathers and mothers, their light that carries with us, surrounds us from beyond the grave. Their love and concern for us does not end at death, and nor will yours for yours. My friends, God bless. Good night. And wherever I am in the world next Sunday, we'll see you then.